What's up, Ape Outliers? Today is a video specifically for you. It's all about GameStop because, we got a breath of fresh air. We got a little bit of movement going on. So obviously we have to dedicate all of our effort into analyzing what's going on because, man, am I stoked to see these two consecutive back-to-back days today up over 8% in an individual day, which again, for GameStop, got to keep it a buck. That's on the smaller side, but I'll take it. I will 100% take it right now. Because if we took a look at the 5-day average daily range at 6%, the 20 days 4%. So, this is even outperforming the average true ranges intraday. So something is going on here. So let's figure out kind of what's happening here. The first thing that I have to point out is take a look at that volume. 15.5 million shares. That is against the 20-day average of 5.7 and the 5-day average of 8, which includes this other outsized day yesterday. So it looks like there's a bit of heat coming into this. And again, if I squish this all the way down, I can see the volume bar right there. So it's really nice to be able to see it poking up because it's competing with all these giant volume bars from the previous squeeze, and we can see it though. So I am very happy about that. The next thing we have to take a look at is the kind of price movement that we're seeing, because if I zoom this in so that we can take a little bit of a closer look, take a look at what percentage of that volume today is buy volume. 97%. So we get this massive increase in volume. Take a look. The 1-day relative volume is up 50%. Over 5 days, 283% growth. 10 days, 327. Like big volume expansion over these trailing timeframes. And the bulk of it today was buy volume, which is cool. The other thing I'm really happy about is I normally see, the disenfranchised apes, rightfully so. It's been a long path for y'all. But I know most of them think that the market makers are just going to not let price go anywhere, but it very clearly did break above 23 today and it held it, right? So there was no suppression below max pain. I think people were quoting max pain at 21, which again, I remind you, max pain moves as the day moves. It's not a static figure, but nonetheless, it didn't matter, right? The market was still bid up enough that it just did not care. So what's going on in here? Well, it's tough to say. Now, if we take a look at the open interest though, this is also getting interesting because the put OI is 294,000 and we now have 621,000 calls. That's getting spicy. This is now getting to a point where it starts looking more and more like there's that really bullish positioning that we've seen historically. Now, I want to be very clear. This is a near-term change. I don't know what this means. And the last thing I would want to do is get a bunch of people's hopes up that there's some sort of impending move, because I don't know. But what I do know is over the last couple days, just the last 2 days, we went from 20.5 and we just closed at 23. So we've made a decent move just over these past 2 days. And I can see the volume in these options starting to build, and the OI is building out. If we take a look at the volume today, it was 316,000 calls against 54,000 puts. Massive skew. And we can see that this is a little bit of a shotgun blast because we see a bunch of these 30 AUGs trading, which is probably people taking their trades down today on expiration and moving them out a week to either 6 SEP. The other thing that you'll see here is there's this 20 SEP expiration, which is starting to build out the next primary expiration cycle. So we're still very front-centered, but it's not supremely just 6 SEP because we see 13 SEP in here, we see 20 SEP here. So people are building out into multiple expirations. Of the volume we saw today, 39% was at the offer or above on the call side, so people buying. And then 35% was at the bid or below on the put side, people selling. So that's a bullish configuration between these transactions. Now, a couple things really popped out to me today specifically. The first thing is we had almost 2,800 of these 18 AUGs go through, smaller size, nothing, that I thought too much about. These, however, I think differently about. So you can tell that we have this one contract here, this one lot, not a one lot, sorry, this one line where we have almost 2,000 of these 21 calls in 20 SEP at $3.30. That's not a small trade. And if we take a look on unusual whales, for those that prefer the visualization here, that's $660,000 in an individual trade. That's not small. That is unequivocally exciting to me because, again, you can't, there's not a lot of retail traders that can move at that size. So I don't know who it is. I genuinely have no idea. But when I look at the strike, this doesn't look like what I've seen Roaring Kitty do previously. Typically, it seems like he likes to be a little bit out of the money. And I'm just using references from Superstonk on his, or not Superstonk, sorry, from his individual account on Reddit to see what his previous options trades have looked like to kind of create a bit of a fingerprint for him. So this doesn't fall in line with his MO, but that's not to say it couldn't be him. But the other thing that's worth mentioning is although he's a super rich, not a cat, as per his recent filing with Chewy, that he made clear that he's not a cat. He's not the only dude with a ton of money. He's one of them, but he's not the only one. So there are other conceivable people or entities that can put on trades in this size. Now, it always gets interesting because you're like, well, how many of those entities are also interested in about 1 month to expiration options, which is his fingerprint? Most of the options I've seen him trade are about a month. They're not typically in the money. So I'm not so sure. Hard to make heads or tails of it, but let's take a look at these 21 calls and 20 SEP. And why would we go in the money? Well, it's pretty simple because if you take a look at these options, they're a 73 delta. That's what this indicates over here. So what that tells me is that for every $1 move in GameStop, these will move 73 cents. As compared to the standard, if you go further out of the money, and let's say you're looking at like these 29s, and these 29s are a 29 delta. So that means that if GameStop moves $1, you see 29 cents in these. So why would we go in the money versus out of the money? Well, I have a video that goes super deep into detail. I'll link to that below. But the Cliff Notes version is if you're not expecting as big of a move, or if you don't care about your ability to compound as much as the gross dollar return, you'll make good money here on a smaller move. Now, you'll notice that these are more expensive. So if we have the scenario that you put on the same size position, meaning one of these costs, let's just call it 350 bucks. If you go out to here to the 29s, let's just call it $100. It's not, I'm just making the math easy for me. You could put on 3 here to every 1 you can put on here. So if you put on 3 of these, now you have the equivalent of like 90 deltas for that $1 move. But you're going to be decaying away super, super fast. And if you don't get a big move, essentially the goalpost, the starting point moves further and further behind you. So it's harder to make money. So the long story short is why would we go in the money? Lower theta decay, and you make more money if it's a smaller move. If it's not a smaller move, you still can make a bunch of money on these. You're just not going to compound as much as you would being a little further out of the money. So we have to wait and see. Again, I have no idea, but I'm just really excited to see this activity picking up because we can see 7,000 traded at these 25s, and I see 9,000 out here at the 30s. And in here at the 21s, we can see essentially almost this entire volume today was from that one trade, right? Because this one trade is $19.99. So this is one person or one entity. I don't know if it's a person that's building a position out. Because if we take a look at the OI, it's only 12.24, and the ad over yesterday was only 125. So these are really interesting to me. For the GME live stream tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time, come hang out, share it with your friends, because hopefully it's a two-way session where I can learn from you and I can walk through options and maybe share some of my experience with you. But I want to go way deeper into detail on these and see what we can dig up as likely contributors, because the other thing we have to acknowledge is that earnings is right before this on 13 September. So part of this is an earnings play, although it's not a standard options earnings play, which would happen in 13 SEP. You typically try to be in the expiration of earnings because they bought options by going a little further out. the IV contraction that tends to happen after earnings will affect them less. And if there's a big move, if they're expecting a big move, which again, I don't know why you would put on a $660,000 position right after earnings unless you're expecting a move or maybe a guide up into earnings. Regardless of that scenario, this is a great choice to decrease some of your sensitivity to the earnings release itself, but stay sensitive to the price movements while keeping it relatively on the cheap. So fascinating trade that got put on in here. I'm really, really eager to see how this pans out and how this works out over the next week as we get closer and closer into earnings. So that wraps me up for today. Later today, we obviously have the outlier options trading for beginners. It's a live stream at 5 p.m. You come hang out, talk about options, learn a little bit. And tomorrow we'll get way deeper into detail here, but I am elated to see some activity, a breath of fresh air coming on in here in GameStop. We're seeing more contracts trading above 100,000, right? So a couple days ago, it was like 2 or 3. Now this is starting to expand further out with one, obviously coming in really close to $750,000. So fantastic. It's what we like to see out here. Some life. So as always, let me know if there's anything you want me to take a look at, be an outlier. I'll see you guys later.